Hi everyone, I'm Bunny, and today on Otome Rambles, I'll be talking about Otome Daoshi Fighting for Love. Its initial announcement at the 2023 Otome Party scored Otome Daoshi one of the top spots in my anticipated releases at the time. This unyielding excitement even pushed me to order 2 story sets for its release. Stuff happened, so I never got past but half of my first route. But now that I've gotten a chance to get back to it, and in English this time, let's see if it lived up to my personal hype. A huge thanks to Axis Games for making this video possible by providing me with a copy. Before we begin, I'd like to give some short disclaimers, so feel free to pause the video to read them if you would like, and if not, let's get on to the video. Shinlin lives in the thriving martial arts kingdom of Kaiyu, where she's a Taoist priestess in training. This year is especially important, as the Tournament of Valor will decide the strongest fighter in the country. On the day of the tournament, however, a horde of assailants appears at the arena and attacks the spectators. Our protagonist fights for her beloved country and for the warrior that she loves. Otome Daoshi Fighting for Love was originally released on September 26, 2024 in Japan before its March 26, 2026 English localization. It is a Chinese-inspired battle romantic comedy. The director of this title is Choko Tsuyuri. The scenario writers listed include Satomi Nakayama, Maro Sasaki, and Ririka Yoshimura. The artist is Ayu Nekoi. Welcome to the country of Kaiyu, where might makes right. Everyone around here loves strength and everything about it. So much that they got a tournament celebrating the strongest of the strong. It's like their World Cup. If you're more books over brawn or just not the strong type, you're kinda out of luck though. Shinlin is an aspiring Taoist and a martial artist who spends her days training under her master and grandfather to one day become a full-fledged Daoshi. Shinlin is the spunky type who's ready to jump at anything that catches her eye. She also has the cutest little panda in the world, Mimi. Haoran, voiced by Shogo Sakata, is Shinlin's bro in a friend way, but also like in a family way, but also not. He is a kind and mindful person with strength to match both traits. Yuhan, voiced by Ura Kazuki, is Shinlin's hot-headed, awkward childhood friend. One could say it's the distance that's made him a little unsociable, but with the blush that colors his face when Shinlin's around, it's hard to believe it's only that. Longle, voiced by Nobunaga Shimazaki, is the refined palace official who has the whole room turning their head wherever he goes due to his looks. Shao, voiced by Yoshitsuku Matsuoka, is a cool and curt fighter from the nation's southern district. He just kinda does his own thing. Uro, voiced by Chiaki Kobayashi, is a spacey fellow with amnesia. His first encounter with Shinlin is a strange one. Even stranger is that he seems oddly familiar with Mimi. Before anyone begins their strongly worded comment chiding me for spoiling the secret route, Uro is not quite that. His LI status was announced much later than the other 4, but he was still promoted leading up to the game's Japanese release via Beezlog, YouTube, and Twitter. Uro is even on the Ultra Special Edition, the Ultimate Sweet Box. Axis also included him in the English promotional material as well. He's just not on the front covers for whatever reason. The common route is 1 chapter. Each route contains 7 chapters and 2 endings. 7 chapters sounds like a lot, but the routes are rather short. There are no bad ends in this game. The only endings available are the true love ending and the romantic love ending. Another cool feature I'd like to highlight is that each route has 3 voiced manga sequences. I was a huge fan. The first 3 routes have no route order restrictions, but you have to play all 3 to play Longle. After completing Longle, you have access to Uro's route via a branch in Longle's first chapter. The devs did post a recommended route order upon its Japanese release, which I ended up following. My route order is as follows: Shao, Yuhan, Haoran, Longle, Uro. I will go through the routes in the order in which I completed them. Shinlin gets roped up in Shao's mission and finding answers to a decades-old mystery. It'd be easier to walk away, but strangely, she can't bring herself to. Similar to the routes that follow it, Shao's narrative is quite bombastic. Grand dilemmas plague Shinlin and Shao, but the resolutions are fairly simple. The route was okay, but I did note a few things. The story's key moments can lack solid rationale, which tints them with a level of flippancy that feels at odds with the tone at times. That brings me to a related sentiment. The route has this cheeky self-awareness of some of its absurdity that you would expect from a comedy. but I feel like it can clash with the narrative trying to simultaneously craft something of depth and consequence. That last sentence is a bit of an overall observation though. Girl, when Grandpa tells you Shinlin got love on the brain, you better believe it, cause this route is proof of that. Shinlin was locked in on Xiao from the get-go, which yes girl, love thy neighbor, but they also moved in 2 days ago. Jokes aside, I actually thought Shinlin's stage 4 insta-love was hilarious. I'm gonna have to be honest and say I felt very little chemistry between these two, but I think both parties leaning into the fact that this was a love speedrun made it work. The aftermath of the collision between Caillou's rivaling factions thrust Shinlin and Yuhan into action, which would go a little smoother if Yuhan wasn't a raging tsundere. Y'all, I have thoughts. I'll start with the good. As reunited childhood friends, Shinlin and Yuhan have a pre-existing history that I feel alleviates some pressure in creating a believable romance in a time crunch. Compared to Xiao's route, Shinlin falls for Yuhan gradually, and we see her view of him adjust and evolve more naturally. There are a couple cute scenes that push these two to confront their feelings that I really liked. Not only that, Mimi is low-key the MVP. As much as I liked the romance, the shining aspect of this route for me is Yuhan. His clumsy tsundere personality is so charming and entertaining. This over-the-top silliness is rounded out by a sincere backstory that humanizes Yuhan and furthers world building. Yuhan, the villain, and the central plot all feel incredibly relevant to one another, and I found myself beginning to anticipate how the story might push the envelope. Then, what would soon prove to be customary in Otome Daoshi struck. The final plot point would drop us into abrupt, short-lived angst, which, for Yuhan, would mark the beginning of the end of my favor. On the technical front, the route ends up okay, if not surface level and with inconsistencies, in line with my thoughts on the other routes. But I think the underlying message that Yuhan's route has is particularly unsavory. I strongly disagree with the unilaterally punitive treatment of its villain, and found the resolution of the storyline all too reductive, naive, and immensely hypocritical. While there are some concessions, the characters severely lack any nuance towards larger things at play in this route. Suffice to say, my opinion plummeted after this. The game as a whole is no stranger to biting off more than it can chew, but this instance of it was way harder to swallow since its earlier developments had gotten my hopes up. One of Yuhan's endings features a tried and true rom-com scenario that, in my perfect world, should have just replaced the whole plot if only to save me the grief. On one hand, I enjoyed Yuhan's character and the romance. On the other, the climax and resolution of the overall narrative had the characters doing a 180 in their convictions, ultimately rocking with things they literally rallied against in other routes. Eager to support Haodan in his journey, Shinlin aids him in the investigation of a sudden disappearance. The pair will confront all kinds of things on the road, maybe even each other. Like Yuhan, Haodan's romance goes for a more grounded and sweet approach. I thought it was pretty cute, honestly. I liked Haodan's deep respect for Shinlin and the grace and compassion he has for her that soon develops into something more. Having grown up together, Shinlin and Haodan view the other as their sibling. The realization of their not-so-familial feelings could have used a bit more tension to tease it out, but it was nice. Despite playing two childhood friend routes back-to-back, I think its execution felt varied enough to where I didn't feel acutely aware of such while playing. Haodan's route was alright. There were some interesting ideas here, but none of them are ever given time to find their footing for the intended emotional impact. With how easily things fall into place for Shinlin and Haodan afterwards, the climax of the route comes off as forced. In addition, the final showdown with the villain is a bit rushed and anticlimactic. While initially floored by Longle's earnest request for her cooperation in investigating the tournament's incident, Shinlin decides she is up for the challenge. Longle is defined by his serene elegance, a fact Shinlin is quite taken with, but it would seem that that's not all there is to him. Most likely due to the starter routes addressing the immediate issues caused by the uproar at the tournament, Longle superficially engages with them and their aftermath. At the risk of sounding cynical, I prefer this to the somewhat facetious attempts in other routes. Here, the real focus is more on Longle's background and its relevant parties. While its length still weakens its execution, I did like its main plot points. I was taken by surprise by Longle and Shinlin's love story. There are some earnest aspects to it, but it's similar to Xiao in its willingness to just lean into the camp of it all. Quite literally the definition of 0 to 100. I was cracking up crazy. This thought Shinlin was my favorite. She was in her element. Taking pity on a guy that aimlessly floats around, Shinlin offers Ura a place to stay, and the rest is history. After Longlei's route, I had hoped the game was shifting away from its societal conundrums. How naive I was. The romance was nonsensical, but with little of the fun parody-like qualities from routes like Xiao or Longle. Instead, it seemed insistent on taking our spontaneous romance seriously, occasionally sprinkling in some awkward, ill-timed gags. As for its plot, we get outlandish turns of events, of which their aftermath revels in its shallow views of social justice and commentary. Like, y'all, no one should ever be subjected to the horrors I witnessed in the name of love. For a game that is pretty much devoid of nuance, the attempt to introduce the concept to it in its final moments was a curious one. The shock value and plot twist in Ura's route aimed to recontextualize the events in the routes that precede it, and, in essence, excuse the narrative from crafting a thoughtful and balanced portrayal of Caillou's societal issues from the start. I can understand the game's preferred reading isn't overtly malicious, and likely affected by its hurried execution, but it still remains woefully oblivious of its skewed framing and the breadth of its implications. I don't personally think that's a misplaced criticism either, because time and time again, Otome Daoshi willingly positions itself in the center of these loaded topics. I was no duck walking up to the lemonade stand and asking if they got any grapes. I wasn't asking for Otome Daoshi to highlight the injustices of Caillou and deconstruct their status quo. I wanted a rom-com. They held me hostage, gun to my head, and force-fed me their politics. I wanted lemonade, but they kept giving me grapes. So of course I'm gonna have an opinion on how they tasted. Shinlin is a happy-go-lucky, boy-crazy knucklehead whose main mode of transportation is via the seat of her pants. Her goofy, proactive personality is a great fit for the comedic portions of the game. I couldn't totally agree with Shinlin's naive nature though. It's funny when it leads her to declare her loyalty to a man she doesn't know deeper than the crevices of his abs. It's a little less funny when she's delegated to quell civil unrest and can't seem to ever think outside of black or white. I know this sounds a bit over the top, but the events of the game sort of lead to this line of thought. There was a self-righteousness to Shinlin that the narrative would ultimately pose as a character flaw, but at any sign of ideological friction, Shinlin would double down and make no meaningful attempt to deconstruct her biases. The story suddenly addresses this at the very end, but it feels unearned, insincere, and just a teensy ironic. With that in mind, it is hard for me to say I totally loved Shinlin, but I did find her mostly enjoyable, and no one could ever make me hate you, Mimi. A lot of aspects of Otome Daoshi feel like nods to the media that came before it. I even likened the game to Sunday cartoons when I initially talked about it in my backlog video last year. Content-wise, I'd say it definitely strayed from that perception, but the presentation, music, aesthetic, the silly mascot character are all still reminiscent of childhood shows I'd watch. I also really enjoyed the creativity of the localization. As comedy is somewhat prevalent in this title, I thought creative adjustments to lines here and there worked incredibly well. There is a lot of personality to the prose that really adds to the experience. It's a thumbs up from me. The romances can vary in how serious they take themselves. In some routes, it's easy to see that there is a genuine attempt at a realistic build-up. Other romances are founded and thrive in absurdity. I'm not really saying either decision is necessarily bad, but in retrospect, it lends to my biggest critique of the game in regards to its total lack of tonal cohesion. Otome Daoshi, Fighting for Love, attempts to blend genres like romantic comedy, political fantasy, action, but you can't have it all. The game's identity is just so confusing. Don't get me wrong, the humor was funny and some of the romances were cute, but they mix like oil and water with the route's greater story. As a result, we get a rushed game with zany, yet inconsistent characters, and a vibrant cartoon-esque world with all the sinister signs of a real repressive regime that's treated more like a gimmick. But hey, at least there's a faux fighting panda. I know some may argue that the game doesn't truly attempt to be a deeper work, but I just think that when you extensively acknowledge and involve corrupt governments and the consequences of oppressive systems, you are trying to be something a bit more complex. These themes would be pushed to the forefront frequently enough to where it was hard for me to merely dismiss them on the basis of them not being the purpose of the game. Perhaps because the game carries itself as such, what usually becomes of them is short-sighted, simple, and even distasteful at times. The key takeaway about cycles of violence that Otome Daoshi imparts on the player is built through cartoonish and patronizing methods and doesn't really hold up when you start thinking about it. Otome Daoshi Fighting for Love is cute and quirky at the best of moments. Her sassy panda in tow, the MC is nothing short of a riot who will fight tooth and nail to get with her man, no matter how much her love goggles blind her. Rather than leaning into that carefree levity, Otome Daoshi instead frequently delves into topics it neither has the time nor the prowess to provide any compelling commentary on, reading more like a beat sheet instead of a fleshed out story. Neither its seriousness nor its silliness was truly successful in my opinion. So, back to the question posed at the beginning of this video. Did the game live up to the hype I had for it? Well, no, not really. The juggling between slapstick love story and half-baked political epic was just a bit too jarring, personally. I would have preferred it had just fully committed to the rom-com. But that's okay. Mimi, I love you, queen.